Minister Stewart joins the international fight against chronic non-communicable diseases at the UN. Discussions to start soon on a proposed gas pipeline between Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago. And in sports, Jackson, the new leaders in Premier League basketball.
With the compliments of Goddard Enterprises, those are the headlines of tonight's edition of the Evening News. Next on CBC.
Credible, balanced, committed. This is the CBC Evening News.
A very good evening to you. I'm Pearson Bowen. This is the CBC Evening News. The United Nations is to adopt a political declaration which is being seen as the beginning of the international fight against chronic non-communicable diseases. And Prime Minister Frundle Stewart says the declaration provides a good platform for ongoing consideration by the General Assembly of the developmental and other impacts of the diseases. He was among a number of Caribbean leaders addressing the United Nations high-level meeting on chronic non-communicable diseases at UN headquarters in New York.
It is our hope that out of this process, developing countries like Barbados will be able to benefit from international cooperation as we continue to address the economic burden of these diseases, which, as long as a decade ago, accounted for 5.3% of our gross domestic product.
Prime Minister Stewart also told the special meeting that urgent multi-sectoral action and policy coordination are needed to achieve the prevention and control of NCDs.
I should like to emphasize that it is imperative that as we go forward, critical decisions are made that include accountability, reporting, and systematic feedback of outcomes. We need to accord greater priority to non-communicable diseases on the development agenda. Barbados looks forward to collaborating with our partners in our ongoing interventions against this epidemic.
Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago are to hold discussions early next month regarding the importation of natural gas into Barbados via a pipeline. Those discussions will address the start of negotiations for an intergovernmental agreement between the two countries to allow private sector companies into the project. Peter Thorne reports.
Confirmation of this from Permanent Secretary in the Foreign Trade Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Bentley Gibbs, who was in Port of Spain last week for the China CARICOM Trade and Economic Conference. He says while those bilateral negotiations were not part of the conference agenda, the opportunity was taken to interface with the appropriate officials in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Trinidad and Tobago on the proposed natural gas pipeline, which will form an important aspect of Barbados' energy future. Mr. Gibbs has indicated that the accord is essential to advance commercial agreements, which will be vital to the success of the project. The proposed project has been in the works for many years. Over those years, consideration was given to whether importation of the natural gas should be by barge or pipeline, and it's now agreed that the importation should be by pipeline. Preliminary discussions on the proposed intergovernmental agreement took place in July in St. Kitts Nevis when Prime Minister Frundle Stewart met with Trinidad's Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar. At the discussions in Port of Spain last week, Barbados also concluded an agreement with China for approximately $10 million to support future projects. The agreement was signed specifically for grant funding. Foreign Minister Senator Maxine McLean, who led Barbados' delegation to the talks, initialed on Bridgetown's behalf, while China's Minister of Commerce signed on behalf of Beijing. Transport Minister John Boyce also attended those talks along with representatives of the Ministry of Agriculture, Industry and Tourism. Peter Thorne, CBC News.
Tourism stakeholders are being told not to expect a reduction in the air passenger duty once fully enforced. That advice from Tourism Minister Richard Seeley. He says Barbados and the Caribbean will continue to lobby against an increase in the controversial tax the British government had decided to postpone until next April, a tax that the region has argued seriously undermined the vital tourism sector.
I don't think it's realistic to look at any reduction in the APD, but we did have the minor success April this year with the Chancellor when he delayed the increases Now we have to wait to see ultimately what the decision of the Treasury Department will be. But at the same time, we continue to keep the pressure up. There's a media campaign, there's a letter writing campaign, there's a lobbying that's taking place, and we sincerely hope that that the UK will for as long as possible not increase the aviation tax for long-haul destinations.
Minister Seeley says reports suggest that tourists are definitely feeling the impact of the APD.
We know that they are spending less, especially those travelers that come here on a budget, and we would sincerely want to see that APD question can be adjusted in a manner that is in our interest.
Well, tourism will be on the curriculum at all schools in Barbados by next year. News of this came today at the launch of the pilot phase of schools' tourism education program at the Hilton Hotel this morning. STEP was conceptualized by the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association in partnership with the Ministries of Education and Tourism. BHTA President Colin Jordan says for now it will form part of the social studies syllabus at 8 primary and 7 secondary schools across the island.
These schools were chosen so that there is involvement across the island, and they have been paired with activities and hotels and attractions so that the marriage between the school and the tourism industry, the business, can be made effective.
The Tourism Minister Richard Seeley praised that initiative, calling it critical to the survival of the industry.
There is certainly a void of an understanding of the tourism industry, even among enlightened elements of our adult population. And therefore, a program like this that goes into the schools, primary, secondary, and tertiary, is, in my view, not only desirable, but essential.
The St. Peter Constituency Council has set itself a task of helping to solve problems which lead to flooding in that parish. That's the word from Chairman Hal Edwards, who spoke to CBC News as the council toured the district of Boscobel. Early this year, there was severe flooding in parts of St. Peter, and Mr. Edwards says the council is hoping to help to avoid a repeat of such. He says officials have been able to identify one of the major problem areas.
There's a canal in the area which really needs to be cleared on a regular basis. The bush and the tree limbs and so forth impede the progress of the water, and then it banks up and then rushes on. So my understanding is that there are about 3 or 4 areas which run into one area. They converge at a particular point, and then there's an extremely huge volume of water.
Well, there were no major reports of flooding in St. Peter over the weekend. However, Mr. Edwards says there were many complaints last time around.
Persons suffered, I would say, significant losses, damage to refrigerators and beds and clothing, etc. And of course there was a deluge of mud and so on, which was in their houses and so on. So I think it is quite distressing, but we are proposing to speak with those persons and hear their side of the story, and channel the information to the, as I said before, the appropriate agencies.
The Barbados Association of Retired Persons has lauded the National Insurance Department for temporarily shelving plans to have all pensioners maintain bank accounts in order to access their money. Chairman of BARP's Consumer Protection Committee, Jai Jabot Singh, believes the cries of members of BARP and of the general public have been heard by the NIS. He made the comments on CBC's Current Affairs program, The People's Business.
I think that's an excellent decision, because I don't think enough research went into it. I don't think they understood the implications that this would have for many elderly people who would have to open bank accounts. People would have to travel to a bank. They may even lose money because certain banks are not going to allow you to keep below a certain minimum balance without a charge, and so on. And there are many people, for convenience sake, that go straight to a supermarket, do their purchases, give them the pension check, and get the change. So I am glad that the NIS took this decision to pull back, you know, at the moment.
Mr. Jabot Singh believes that pensioners should be given a choice in the matter, since some support the idea while others do not. Well, under the bank lodgement method proposed, pensions would have been issued for a 4-week period rather than 2-week intervals.
In other words, I receive my pension check at the bank. I'm not inconvenienced because I can use a computer, I can use the ATM machine, and so on, right? But there are many people who can't, and I think it's a good decision. I really applaud it.
President of BARP, Ed Bushell, also commended the move, noting that a lot of factors had to be taken into account, like senior citizens who either had no bank account or would have had a difficulty opening one and accessing the funds.
We are happy that they listened to what the people were saying and acted very quickly on looking at the decision. We feel, like Jai said, I think it's important that people be given the choice. And they need to find a mechanism where people who want deposits in the banks can indicate by a form or whatever manner, and give them the number, and then it goes from there. The whole intention, listening to what was said, was to save money, the postage, the printing, etc. We understand that, but we are saying that we need to take care of those people who really can't take care of themselves.